The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and regret. My parents sat across from me at the worn oak table, their faces a mix of defiance and unease. My mother clutched her coffee mug, her knuckles pale, while my father avoided my gaze, staring at the chipped linoleum floor. "We had to do it, Grace," my mother said, her voice sharp with justification. "Your brother needed the money more. We gave your college fund to Ethan to help him start over." The words hit like a slap, stealing my breath. My college fund, $40,000 I'd earned through years of late-night shifts, summer jobs, and my grandmother's bequest, gone. Handed to my jobless, reckless brother without a word to me. My name is Grace, and at 24, I'd just learned my parents valued my sacrifices less than Ethan's failures. But as their betrayals sank in, I made a silent vow. They'd taken what was mine, but I'd take it back. Life before that moment was a tapestry of effort and quiet ambition, woven with the threads of hard work and hope. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, in a split-level house where the porch sagged under the weight of time, and the backyard erupted in wildflowers each spring. My days were a steady rhythm of purpose. Mornings, I worked at Daisy's Diner, pouring coffee for truckers and regulars, the clatter of plates and the hiss of the grill a comforting soundtrack. I'd banter with my coworker, Jess, about her latest dating mishap, my apron stained with coffee splashes, my smile genuine despite the ache in my feet. Those shifts weren't just a job, they were my pride, each tip a step toward my dream of a master's degree in business. Afternoons, I'd rush to Boise State University, my backpack heavy with marketing textbooks, scribbling notes in lectures about brand strategy and consumer behavior. Evenings, I tutored high school kids in algebra, their shy smiles rewarding my patience. Every dollar I earned went into my college fund, a sacred pool I guarded fiercely, knowing it was my ticket to a life beyond scraping by. My apartment was my sanctuary, a small studio downtown with exposed brick walls and a window that caught the sunset's glow. Fairy lights draped over my bed, casting a warm shimmer across my cluttered desk, where textbooks jostled for space with a half-dead succulent. My vision board hung above, a collage of aspirations, photos of graduate school campuses, city skylines, a corner office with a view. I'd spent hours curating it, cutting out magazine clippings, pinning acceptance letters I hoped to receive. Late at night, I'd sit cross-legged on my thrift store rug, researching programs at Wharton, Stanford, and the University of Washington, imagining myself in lecture halls, debating case studies. Those moments of solitude, with a mug of chamomile tea and the hum of the city outside, filled me with a quiet certainty. This was my path, and I was carving it with every shift, every late-night study session. Family was the heartbeat of my world, or so I thought. My parents, Ellen and Robert, were fixtures in my life, their modest home a constant backdrop to my memories. They'd cheer my straight A's at family barbecues, their voices loud with pride as they called me our future CEO. I'd beam, soaking in their approval, even as I noticed their eyes linger on Ethan, my older brother by 3 years. Ethan was the family's golden boy, his charm a magnet that drew everyone in. But he was aimless, drifting from one failed dream to another, a band that never booked a gig, a tech startup that fizzled before launch. He'd land back on our parents' couch, his duffel bag stuffed with excuses. At one barbecue, I overheard my mother reassuring a neighbor, "Ethan's just creative. He'll find his way." I'd smiled, passing out potato salad, but the words stung. My discipline, my sacrifices, were expected, while Ethan's failures were indulged. Still, I loved him, his easy grin a reminder of childhood days building forts in the backyard. I believed family meant lifting each other up, so I worked harder, saved more, and trusted my parents to honor my dreams. But the signs of betrayal were there, creeping in like shadows I tried to ignore. Ethan's presence at the house became a constant, his car parked crookedly in the driveway most weekends. He'd saunter in, tossing his keys on the counter, asking for a little help with rent or a new phone. "Just until I get back on my feet," he'd say, his grin disarming. My parents always caved, their wallets opening as easily as their hearts. I'd catch them exchanging worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking, their voices low as they discussed Ethan's latest crisis. One Sunday, I found a stack of unpaid utility bills on their counter, the red, past due, stamps glaring. "Everything okay?" I asked, my stomach tightening. My mother waved it off, her smile forced. "Just a mix-up, Grace. Don't worry." But worry crept in, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. Their behavior grew more secretive, conversations halting when I entered the room. I'd overhear fragments, my father on the phone, his voice strained, saying, "We'll cover it, Ethan, but this is the last time." I'd ask, casual as I could, "Is Ethan okay?" And they'd pivot, talking about the weather or my grades. The shift was subtle, but it gnawed at me. I started checking my college fund's online portal, a habit born of unease. The balance, $40,000, painstakingly built, was steady, but my parents' access as co-signers loomed like a storm cloud. I'd log in late at night, the screen's glow casting my studio in blue, my heart racing as I confirmed the funds were still there. Guilt followed, sharp and bitter. "They're my parents," I'd tell myself. "They'd never betray me." But doubt lingered, fueled by memories of Ethan's carefree spending, the way my mother's eyes softened when he promised to "make it big." The truth shattered my world 3 weeks before that kitchen showdown. I'd logged into the fund's portal to pay a graduate school application fee, my fingers trembling with excitement. The page loaded, and the world stopped. $0. My $40,000, years of double shifts, skipped concerts, my grandmother's final gift, gone. My breath caught, tears stinging my eyes as I stared at the empty balance. I called the bank, my voice shaking, certain it was a glitch. The representative's tone was kind but firm. "The funds were withdrawn by an authorized user 3 days ago," she said. My parents. I sank onto my couch, the fairy lights mocking my vision board's promises. A memory surfaced, my grandmother, her hands frail but warm, pressing a check into mine. "This is for your education, Grace," she'd said. "Don't let anyone take it from you." The betrayal burned, a fire in my chest. I drove to my parents' house, the Boise skyline a blur through my tears, Ethan's car in the driveway a silent accusation. Inside, Ethan lounged on the couch, a new laptop open, a shiny watch glinting on his wrist. "Hey, sis," he said, oblivious, his fingers tapping out a message. I didn't respond, my pulse pounding as I waited for my parents. When they arrived, their faces told me everything. They didn't ask why I was there, they knew. We sat in the kitchen, the air thick with tension. "We gave your college fund to Ethan," my mother said, her voice defensive. "He needed it to start over." Ethan, eavesdropping from the living room, added, "You're doing fine, Grace. You don't need it like I do." My father nodded, his eyes on the floor. "We didn't want to stress you. You're always so busy." I stared at them, the people who'd taught me to work hard, who'd promised to support my dreams. "You didn't even ask me," I whispered, my voice cracking. My mother's face hardened. "Don't be selfish. Family helps family." I stood, the chair scraping against the linoleum. "You stole my future," I said, louder now. "And you think I'll just accept it?" My father tried to speak, but I cut him off. "We're done here." I left, the screen door slamming, their voices fading behind me. They thought I'd forgive them, like always. They were wrong. The drive home was a storm of emotions, anger, grief, disbelief. I collapsed onto my couch, the vision board looming like a cruel joke. Graduate school, my ticket to a better life, felt impossible now. Ethan's watch, his laptop, the food truck they'd funded, it was all built on my sacrifices. I wanted to scream, to storm back and demand they fix it. But I knew they wouldn't. They'd chosen Ethan, again. The pain was a physical weight, pressing on my chest, but beneath it, a spark ignited. I'd been the responsible one my whole life, the one who carried the family's burdens. No more. They'd taken what was mine, but I wasn't helpless. I'd take it back, not with tears, but with a plan. I sat up, wiping my eyes, and opened my laptop. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The next morning, I woke with a clarity that cut through the fog of betrayal. My coffee was bitter, matching my mood, but my resolve was unshaken. I started with the bank, calling to confirm the withdrawal details. The representative explained that my parents, as co-signers, had legal access, but the transaction raised red flags since the account was in my name. I hung up, my mind racing. Then I called Mr. Callahan, my grandmother's lawyer, who'd handled her estate. He'd known me since I was a child, his office a familiar place of leather chairs and old books. Part of the fund was Grandma's bequest, I said, my voice steady despite my nerves. Can they take it? He paused, papers rustling. Her will specified it was for your education, Grace. If it's been misused, you have a case. Relief flooded me, followed by determination. I asked him to draft a claim, keeping it confidential. I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I needed leverage. The turning point came when I found Ethan's USB drive. He'd left it on the kitchen counter during one of his visits, and I'd taken it, driven by a mix of curiosity and anger. Back in my studio, I plugged it in, my hands trembling. The files were a goldmine, a chaotic business plan for his food truck, receipts for $25,000 spent on a used truck, permits, and equipment, plus another $15,000 on personal expenses, a laptop, designer clothes, a weekend in Vegas with friends. But the real gem was the lease contract for the truck's parking spot. Ethan had listed my parents as guarantors, meaning they'd be liable if he defaulted. And Ethan's track record, missed rent, unpaid loans, screamed default. I sat back, my heart pounding. This wasn't just theft, it was a vulnerability I could exploit. I saved the files, my mind spinning with possibilities. They thought they'd secured Ethan's future, but they'd handed me the key to mine. Over the next week, I moved like a chess player, each step deliberate. I met with Mr. Callahan in his cluttered office, the smell of old coffee lingering. He reviewed the bequest's terms, his glasses slipping down his nose. We can demand repayment or sue for misappropriation, he said, his confidence bolstering mine. I nodded, signing the paperwork to start the claim. Next, I called the food truck's leasing company, posing as a concerned sister. Ethan's struggling, I said, my voice calm. Are my parents aware they're guarantors? The manager confirmed they were, emailing me the contract after I mentioned my role in funding the truck. It was a legal landmine, and I held it carefully. I also launched a freelance marketing side hustle, pitching logo designs to local cafes and boutiques. The income was modest, but it kept my graduate school dream alive. I didn't tell my family. Let them think I was broken. The plan came to life at a family dinner I couldn't dodge. My mother had called, her voice dripping with false warmth, inviting me to move past this. I agreed, not out of hope, but because I needed them together. The dining room was a battlefield, the aroma of roast chicken clashing with unspoken resentment. Ethan sat across from me, his new watch catching the light, bragging about his food truck's grand opening that hadn't happened yet. My parents nodded, their pride in him a fresh wound. I ate in silence, waiting for the right moment. After dessert, as the clink of forks faded, I spoke. I know you think I've let the college fund go, I said, my voice steady. But I haven't. That money was mine, and you stole it. My mother rolled her eyes. Grace, we've been over this. Ethan needed it. I smiled, pulling a folder from my bag. Then you'll want to see this. I slid the folder across the table, open to the lease contract. Ethan's food truck is failing, I said, my gaze locked on theirs. He's missed 2 payments, and you're the guarantors. Default means you owe $15,000. And the $40,000 you took. Grandma's will says it was for my education. I've filed a claim to recover it. My father's face drained of color, and Ethan's jaw dropped. You're lying, he said, his voice shaky. I leaned forward, unflinching. Check the contract. Call the leasing company. The bank has records, and my lawyer's ready. You bet on Ethan's dream, and now you'll pay for it. My mother's mug shook in her hands. Grace, you wouldn't sue us. We're family. I stood, gathering my coat. You didn't care about family when you took my future. Why should I? I left, their stunned silence following me. Driving home, I felt a surge of power, the weight of their betrayal lifting with each mile. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Ethan's food truck collapsed within a month, plagued by broken equipment and no customers. He'd ignored health inspections, racking up fines, and the leasing company called in the default. My parents faced a $15,000 bill, forcing them to sell their second car and dip into their retirement. They called me daily, their voices a mix of fury and desperation. How could you do this to us? My mother sobbed. You're tearing this family apart. I didn't respond. They'd made their choice, and I'd made mine. Mr. Callahan's claim gained traction, and after a tense mediation, my parents agreed to repay $30,000, scraping together funds from their dwindling savings. Ethan was left with nothing, his business a pile of debt and scrap metal. I didn't celebrate. The money was a tool, a way to reclaim my path. The real triumph was shedding their expectations, stepping out from under their shadow. Rebuilding was a slow, uneven process. The betrayal lingered, a dull ache that surfaced in quiet moments. I moved to a cheaper apartment, a cramped unit with peeling paint, to save money. My freelance work grew, with contracts for a startup social media campaign and a coffee shop's rebrand. I poured myself into graduate school applications, the reclaimed fund covering fees and deposits. Lila was my lifeline, dragging me to dive bars and hiking trails, her laughter a reminder of who I was beyond my family's choices. You're unstoppable, she'd say, and I started to believe it. Ethan called once, his apology feeble. I didn't mean to screw you over, he said. I hung up, his words hollow. My parents' texts grew sporadic, their tone shifting to cautious remorse. I ignored them, focusing on my own path, but the silence was heavy, a reminder of the family I'd lost. A year later, I stood in a lecture hall at the University of Washington, my first day of graduate school. The Seattle skyline glittered outside, a canvas of possibility. My marketing thesis, exploring ethical branding, had caught my professor's attention, sparking discussions that fueled my ambition. I'd built a new community, classmates who debated over coffee, a mentor who saw my potential, a hiking buddy who shared my love of wildflowers. My parents sent a letter, a tentative apology I read but didn't answer. They lived frugally now, their pride humbled by debt. Ethan had moved to Portland, chasing another doomed venture, estranged from our parents. I didn't wish them harm. I'd moved beyond their reach. As I walked across campus, my backpack heavy with textbooks, I remembered my grandmother's words, "Don't let anyone take your dreams." I hadn't. They'd tried to steal my future, but I'd crafted a better one. What do you do when your family betrays you? You take back what's yours and build a life they can't touch.